Good morning and welcome to our Coffee With webinar where we're honored to have with us Per. Good morning.
Morning.
The CEO of cBrain, the Danish technology company that recently won our Dansk-Tysk Handelskammer Danish Company of the Year 2023 award. cBrain has played a significant role in Denmark's digital transformation, particularly in the public administration, and is now expanding its activities also in the German market. I'm Andreas Wenzel, the CEO of the German-Danish Chamber, and I'll be asking Per some key questions about their success in Denmark and how it can translate to Germany's digital landscape. Denmark's rapid pace in digital government services is akin to an athlete who has been training for years, whereas Germany, with our reliance on paperwork, is still getting ready for the race. However, there's good news. Germany is gearing up to join the sprint. As the CEO of cBrain, Per is uniquely positioned to share insights on how Denmark became a leader and how Germany can follow suit. Let's dive in and explore how both countries can soon be sprinting side by side in the digital transformation journey. Don't forget, the webinar is being recorded and you might ask questions if you have them to be addressed to Per in the chat of the webinar tool, and we'll be asking these questions and answering these questions later. So Per, good morning again. Great to have you here with us here in our webinar studio in Copenhagen. cBrain has been at the forefront of Denmark's digital transformation, especially in public administration. As the CEO of a company, also recognized for its pioneering role, what do you think makes Denmark a leader in digital government services? Are there any cultural, technology, policy elements that have significantly contributed to this success?
Of course, it's difficult to say, and I also know that countries around are looking into it, and I know that there's a lot of visitors coming to Denmark from the outside. But I think one of the things I believe could be a reason is that Denmark is a small country. Mm-hmm. So to compete with the big guys, you have to find a way to work smart. So therefore you've been kind of forced to it. But also, I think the political situation in Denmark has been historically that we've been fighting about everything on the social side, etc., etc. But in this area of digitization, there seems to be kind of peace between the left and the right during the years. And what I often say, software doesn't care about politics or budgets or any of these things. It's basically mathematics. And I think there's a bit good understanding in the Danish parliament that accepting that this is a very long journey. So it's been supported on both sides. So you have kind of had the political piece, but also push to get something going. And a third element here, very much driven from a business case. Yeah. There's a tendency that people, start from the technology. Oh, and whether it just got safety or all these kind of issues. But in Denmark, digitization has been a business case. So many of the initiatives have been driven by the Ministry of Finance. So you have a lot of laws. You have hundreds of laws coming in with the purpose of pushing that agenda. And as I said, during the years, with both the left and the right wing supporting it.
So government and the lawmaker have basically been positive element and contributing elements to the rapid implementation and the pragmatism behind Denmark digitization.
Yeah, and I think the funny you meant the word pragmatic, because there's a tendency, of course, that you, again, have all the technology discussion, and sometimes they can be almost religious, as you can imagine, but also the compliance discussion. Sometimes you tend to make it a compliance discussion without actually doing something. Yeah. I don't know, you probably have the same issue in Germany, but sometimes you keep on thinking. And the problem you have is the technology is changing at a speed where you can keep on thinking without catching up. Yeah. And I think Denmark has been pragmatic in the sense that we have taken the decision, okay, let's digitize this and digitize this. And of course we have had our challenges, but the good story, if you try to do something, then you learn, and then you may do something after.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. And to put it a bit more concretely, maybe to our viewers and listeners, could you share like specific examples of cBrain's contributions to Denmark's digital demonstration that demonstrate these kind of topics we're talking about?
Yes, I think clearly we've been working since 2006 on doing digital projects, but we have been working very much trying to create a kind of a standard, which means, looking up to the big picture of compliance. But what we have done is we started out working with the ministries.
Yeah.
And but we did not work with all the departments. We actually worked with 2 ministerial departments. And secondly, we were working, so to speak, with the business side. So it was the top executives. It was the Staatssekretär, to take the German word. It was the Staatssekretärs who wanted to work digital. And what we were allowed to do was work with 2 ministries and basically trying to create a model for how could they work digital. And when we had the first 2 ministries on, we could then jump to the next. So today we have all, which is probably the only place in the world, but we have all ministries in Denmark running on exactly the same software. Mm-hmm. But when we started working with them, each of them had a huge IT department, a lot of different software and rewritten and all this. But having a situation today where we have been able to create I'm often talking about a model for digital bureaucracy, but it was invented because we started small, working with with the first 2 ministries, and based on that, we could take that to the next one. So, and I think this is very characterizing by successful IT. Start small, think big, rather than think big and fail.
And small. But that's a very interesting point, because obviously if you have different administration, different ministries, and everyone has their own system, they are normally very reluctant to give away any of these autonomy. And that basically leads me to the second question, because now we are to the German situation. We spoke about Denmark and what's your role and contribution here and your insights from Denmark. We are now looking into the German market. You are looking into the German market, because obviously there's experiences to share from the Danish example for Germany. So how can Germany benefit from the Danish experience? If you look at Germany, I said, look, Denmark is already running the race. Germany, we are still kind of like tying our shoelaces together, but we are obviously interested and willing to go up for the sprint. So what could you share as experiences? What could be interesting thoughts for Germany's digitization process?
First of all, I think I should come in, because sometimes if I talk to people from large countries, whether it's Germany or US or France and so on, they'll say, well, can we learn from a small country? The interesting, which I have found, and 1/3 of our revenue now is outside Denmark, and we actually have customers in 5 continents. So we try a little. We even have installations in the Emirates with the Ministry of Finance. So being able to take the experiences out. But what I found in the beginning was there was a kind of question: can does it work across countries? But I have to share a funny story. It comes out that the reason there is an underlying kind of model for bureaucracy, and I have to say we believe bureaucracy is a good word, bureaucratic is a bad word, but you need to find a way to do smart bureaucracy. Yeah. Funny thing is that I think Denmark was a big country in old times and actually owns a major part of Germany. So what happened was that the Danish king actually took German bureaucrats in to run his kingdom. So the funny thing is the bureaucracy is actually invented by German people working for the Danish king. Mm-hmm. And therefore many of the words we have in Denmark, we have something called forelæggelse, which is the approval process. You call it forlage. Mm-hmm. So we can see it's, so in some way we stole from Germany and used that. And this means that the model for how you run the bureaucracy, so to speak, is the same across the world. There is an underlying model. And I wanted to share that because and the more I get to know countries, the more you work underlying exactly the same way. Yeah. And that has been part of, You mentioned we've been able to go into Germany. We started working with Deutsche Rentenversicherung, which you can say is an old traditional.
Yeah.
How could they benefit from reusing? But it comes out that in their digital transformation, we could take exactly the same model, exactly the same, and copy and adapt that in. And now we have several thousand users in Deutsche Renten running on exactly the same software as the German ministries are running. And therefore, sorry for the long, but to your question, this means that, if German ministries wanted to digitize, choose one or two, let's see what we can reuse, do a copy and adapt that, and then scale after that.
Yeah.
Instead of
start running.
So you had the word before. Instead of thinking big and ending small, start small and scale.
Just start running. Yeah, that's very interesting. And given your experiences and also your first kind of like engagements you have in the German market, what challenges do you see Germany could face in implementing digital initiatives that we have in Denmark? Because the German situation is different, society, culture. We already spoke about compliance and these topics. So what challenges do you see, and how do you think could you contribute or convince German partners to overcome these challenges, these kind of like things that hinder ourselves maybe from being more pragmatic and being faster?
It's actually a very big question. I think if I should look at some of the challenges I've seen, and I actually spent quite some time in Germany talking to people, I think if the Danish people have a much higher trust in governments than you have in Germany. That's more or less the only difference I can see.
Okay.
So I think the German authorities have to convince citizens that this is good. And I remember we have had a shift in Denmark. Whenever there is a new law or things coming out in Denmark, Danish people expect that it's digitized. If Danish government comes out with something and you cannot self-service and it doesn't work, they'll say, okay, what's going on here? But I have a feeling that in Germany you would kind of question, is this good for me, and so on.
Yeah, that's right.
So I think one of the things you have to work on is on the mentality, showing that it's good. And that's also kind of going back to my approach. Do some projects, show something.
Yeah.
Because if you show something, you cannot convince people to trust you by talking. But showing some examples, select some smart self-services, show that you begin, and there's one extra to this one. I just came to think about it in this, that when we looked at the ministries, the digitization of a Danish ministry, this was driven by the top executives. And this means that the Staatssekretär and the Abteilungsleiterin and so on, what they did not only talk about it, they went live themselves. So you had not enough to talk about it, you have to show it. So think about that. Maybe what you should do is if you have a ministry, the Staatssekretär has to decide, I'm not going to work digital from my PC,
He's
from my mobile.
Chief digital officer himself.
You have to show it. And therefore, on the bigger picture to you, show some good examples, select just some and make them successful.
Yeah, that's a good point, because at the end of the day, performance matters. Performance is what convinces also citizens to not only accept, but to see the benefit of digital solutions. And that's obviously a case here in Denmark. But speaking about compliance and speaking about challenges in Germany, the discussions we are having about digitalization, digital government services is very often centered around data protection. Yeah. And data protection sometimes seems as it is the kind of like the one and all tool to kind of like make it more difficult for projects to be implemented. But I mean, Denmark, you have the same kind of like legal framework when it comes to data protection on the European level. How do you see kind of like these topics evolve around digitization? How do you convince people that digital services and processes are safe in terms of the use of private data? How can we kind of like bring this discussion into a different direction?
Yeah, maybe going back to what I mentioned before, start with the business case. Because there's a tendency that when we start IT projects, you will very soon jump into the technology discussion. Can this be safe? Which front end should it be a web front end, and should this be cloud or whatever? There's a tendency that when we do IT projects, we very soon move in and talk technology. My advice is start with the business case, start with what do you want to achieve, what should be the user experience, and agree on what this should be doing, and then after apply select technology, but wait with the technology until you know what you want to do. Because often you will find it's not that bad. And of course, you're right. We have exactly the same requirements on security, and Danish government do not like their data out in the public and so on. But funny enough, if I look at, we have all the Danish ministers, and we have more than 50 agencies. So we have more than 75 government organizations on exactly the same running as it's a digital platform we're supplied for them. We have never had a breach, one single breach. Of course, and we have, and actually we can look at, we have often thousands of attacks per hour into these systems. So of course we have to protect ourselves. But if you start by focusing on that, you'll never get to do something.
And then at the end of the day, the digital solution might be safer than the paper.
That's another
than the
thing.
paper that's lying around.
No, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Again, dear viewers, I'd like to remind you that you have the opportunity to ask questions yourself to Per. So please write your question in the chat function of the webinar tool, and then we'll actually address your questions as well, as we are running into the last 10 minutes of our webinar. But going back to our discussion, Per, you have made your first experiences now in Germany. We spoke about the differences that there are between Germany and Denmark, and kind of like which experiences, Danish experiences, are interesting for the German digital process. What would be your advice based on your experience, on your work? Which way could Germany go to accelerate digital transformation? What are the key elements? We already mentioned some of them, but what are the key elements? And what role could partnerships between Danish experiences, cBrain for instance, and German institutions play in this respect to help us speed up and join you in the race? Yeah.
First of all, accepting that Germany is significantly larger than Denmark. This means it's not just a question of taking what's done in Denmark and copy it in. But I think what you can use Denmark for is inspiration. And as I mentioned before, I think this is also very much a cultural journey. Yeah. Shifting from digitization seems to be a little complicated, and data security and all this, changing it into something which is really fundamental for our future society. Because I believe if we look at some of the big challenges we have in productivity, in labor, if we look at the climate, we are not going to fight climate action issues unless you get a much stronger digitization in the government sector. So you have to get there, but you need to get the buy-in, of course, from the citizens, but I think they're ready if you show them something. So I think working on the cultural change and the mentality change, because if you look at a German civil servant, what are you measured on? Are you measured on going first on a digital transformation project, taking the risk and failing maybe?
Yeah.
No, the question is, how do you award people? So I think it's very much a question of setting the agenda. And I think what you could do is talking to that we want this to happen. And then instead of measuring people or writing IT plans, measuring them on doing specific projects.
Yeah.
You may also, and this sounds a little funny, but work with smaller budgets. Actually tell people, do a number of projects, learn from them, but with smaller projects, and then you can scale on later.
Yeah.
So we want to see, again, building trust. We have shown you something that's working. But that's a major thing for a civil servant to operate like that, because normally, a zero mistake culture, that's where, and that doesn't really fit, and that's a challenge for the government sector, that the zero mistake culture doesn't fit into digitization.
Yeah, yeah. Again, it comes back to performance matters, and you can convince your citizens through performance and actually offering them something. So we have received some questions. One question, could you please shed some light on how the initial contact with the German partners was established? Was it facilitated through delegations with Danish ministries in Germany, or through direct identification and presentation of the opportunity? So how did you get into contact with German opportunities and clients in Germany?
We were part of delegations, and we've been working both with some of your colleagues, the import-export and so on. So we were invited in and sharing experiences, and we have also had a number of events, for instance, at the Danish embassy. I know you're also working close with them. So I think basically these are the kind of opportunities, sharing experiences during these kind of events. And that's also where you meet the early adapters, the people who are actually interested
to listen to you and to learn from you. Yeah. Another question from a viewer. What is the biggest challenge for a Danish company in competing with local German vendors? And how do you address this? So obviously there's German competition in Germany. So how do you go about this? How do you see the German competition in Germany, and how do you address it? How do you compete with them?
It's clear the market we are in is a huge market. So you don't really have this specific competitor. So therefore we are not really going against a specific vendor or something. To some extent, I think we are having a more blue ocean type approach. Yes, we have an offering here, and there's a lot of room in this market. So it's not that competitive. Clearly, it's seen very competitive, but the size of the market means that, for instance, when we are coming in and being allowed to present, because some people, basically, I'll tell people, if you're taking this, we take standard software and configure, we believe that it's much faster and smarter. There's also people who will tell you, do the traditional approach. So my point is, it's kind of up to the customer which approach. And I know there's a certain number of what I call the early adapters who believe that, yes, you can reuse experiences, you can go on standard software. There'll be a lot who's not. So I basically focus on the one who are open to that approach.
Yeah, super, thanks. We received a third question. Hey, Per, do you work centrally with Berlin, or do you address each of the Bundesländer? And if so, which of these are most upfront when it comes to digitalization?
I don't know if I dare.
So we want to have a Danish perspective ranking of the German Bundesländer in terms of digitalization.
First of all, yes, if we're looking in Germany, I believe, yes, there's the federal and then there's the Länder. And interesting enough, each of the 16 Länder has the size or bigger than Denmark. So for us, it's very interesting too. So what we do is we talk to Länder. Some of them we talk more to than others. There's a few we are talking to, and I think we are looking for kind of the front runners in this. But I don't think I'll go into specific countries. But it's clear we find that the government in some countries in German Länder are more focused on accelerating something. And I guess, but on the other hand, I have to say, at the area, for instance, on climate, we're doing all IT for the Danish Environmental Protection Agency. And clearly, if you look at the Länder, here is an example also where if you take all the EPA, the environmental protection agencies across the lender, that's also where you may see a national collaboration, which is not on federal level, but which is actually, so there is a number of ways to work in here.
Yeah, and then obviously also the municipalities and the Kommunen come into play for certain kind of administrative processes.
Yeah, because we are working with the two largest, we're working with Copenhagen City, where we have several thousand users on exactly the same platform as they're using in the ministries. And then, of course, therefore, we're also talking to some of the larger German cities now.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, very interesting. So as a maybe last question before we close, where do you see cBrain in Germany in the next few years? Are you convinced that you will be developing the market and that you will convince German bureaucracy to learn from the Danish experience or to accept the Danish insights and the Danish way of doing things?
I think so far, I think we are in a very happy situation. That's also a reason, thank you for the award, that we've been able to demonstrate that it is possible to reuse Danish experiences in Germany. But when we talk about it, I often say I have a dream. You know, if I could help Germany jump 10 years in 10 months by reusing Danish experiences, because the fact is, by reusing experiences, you could jump at a very different speed. So therefore, this jumping 10 years and 10 months is kind of our vision for what we could help. And clearly, we're not the only company. There's a lot of companies focusing on this, but we have a wish.
Yeah, I can only join you in this wish. And I do think that there is indeed a lot to gain from Danish experiences when it comes to digitalization in Germany. And this is also a topic for us here at the German-Danish Chamber of Commerce of how can we work together at the end for the benefit of our societies, for the benefit of the citizens, and not only for competitiveness, but also for sustainability. So I would like to thank you very much, Per, for having shared your insights with us here at this coffee table. I would like to thank you, dear viewers, for your interest in the topic today. And I hope that you've gained some interesting insights from what Per has discussed. I want to take this opportunity to also already invite you for our next Coffee With in roughly 3 weeks, 14th of May at 8:30. I will be talking to Patrick Huber, H2 Energy Europe, about a topic that is also highly relevant, as is digitization, that is green transition, and that is the topic of green hydrogen, and is there a market for Danish green hydrogen in Germany. So again, thank you so much for your interest. See you soon again. Bye-bye and have a good day still.